Welcome to the Beyond Bones podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Today we have the curator of Malacology. It's probably a simple way to put it, Tina Petway. Tina, how are you doing today?
I'm great.
Awesome.
How are you today?
I'm very good. I'm doing better, and I think we're both doing better than you were a few years ago.
Yeah, definitely.
Getting stung by what we're about to talk about. Tina had a narrowly escaped death, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'll just hand it over to Tina. Let's start at the beginning. Where were you when all this happened?
We were doing research on an uninhabited island in the Solomon Islands, which is near Australia. And we were fortunate enough to get permission to go onto one and study the life on the reefs that were surrounding that beautiful little island. It was only about a 4-acre island, and the house we stayed in was actually just a hut. No windows, no doors, all open, but it was lovely. We had a lot of people come to visit from other islands. They would come in their little canoes to bring things to trade, but they also would bring shells in the evening. And one of those shells happened to be a species that nearly killed me. I was walking on a reef at low tide near the hut that we were living in, which was close to the beach, fortunately for me. As I was walking through this wade of clumps of coral, in the sand, I noticed a live shell coming out of the sand to hunt. The shell that came out was a member of a cone family, which can be very deadly. This particular species can kill people because it does affect vertebrate fish. Therefore, it affects vertebrate people. For the same reasons, it shuts your heart down. It makes your lungs stop working. Your blood begins to coagulate. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be smart and pick this one up and put it in my collecting bag to study. This species can be deadly, and what happens is the animal that lives inside looks a lot like the snail in your backyard, and its business end is the small end. So as this guy came out, he's hunting, and this would be the end that could produce barbs containing venom. So as I picked this one up, I knew to pick it up by the safe end. But as I was transferring it to put it into my collecting bag, I noticed a second specimen of the same species coming out of the sand near my foot. I only had on tennis shoes, and I could be stung through those tennis shoes. So I thought, I'm going to be smart and pick that one up and put that one in my collecting bag and then put this one up. But as I turned to pick this one up, my hand also turned, which meant that the deadly end was now pointing directly at my finger. When I realized that my hand was burning, I looked over and realized my hand had actually turned and the shell had moved. And I now had 3 tiny barbs from this finger right here. I realized I was in danger. I already was having a hard time breathing. I was having difficulty seeing, so I managed to get out of the coral reef by walking around the heads of coral and getting out onto the sand. I saw our hut in the far distance and began walking toward it. By the time I got to the hut, I was pretty much dizzy from walking, and my vision was very cloudy and very elliptical. So I wrote a note to my husband telling him what had happened, what I'd been stung by. I took handfuls of antihistamines to help with my breathing and packed papaya onto my finger, which papaya is a natural preservative and can help pull some of that poison. At least that's what the thinking was at the time. So I tucked myself into my bed, tucked my mosquito netting in around me because I was afraid of those deadly mosquitoes, having just been stung, and went to sleep. 3 days later, I began to come to consciousness because there was no hospital near. The only way to get off of the island was by boat, and then a 2-hour plane trip if there happened to be a plane at the landing site on Guadalcanal, which there wasn't. So we stayed there by ourselves for three days and managed to make it safely through there. On the way from those islands, we were there for 3 weeks. On the way home, we did stop in Hawaii. And one of the few experts in treating this type of venomation lived in Hawaii, Dr. Pat Burgess. And when I called and told him what had happened to me, he said, I want to see you right away. So I went to his house, told him what had happened and what I did to save myself. And he said, you did the only thing that you could do. And when you're just lucky with 3 envenomations at one time, until then it was thought only 1 envenomation could happen. So now we know for sure that they can repeatedly fire those little poisonous darts. I've been plagued by headaches ever since, but I'm still here, and basically in pretty good condition.
I've got questions, as I'm sure the listeners have as well. So take us back to, you just got stung, and something that really stuck out to me, and probably stuck out to a lot of listeners as well, is how quickly did you get to that headspace where I've got to leave a note for my husband? Like this may be, that fear that they may find you gone,
and not know what the heck happened.
So
That's right.
do you remember what was going, if you don't mind talking about it, what was going through your mind when you crossed that threshold to know, I have to write a note? This may be the end.
It was almost immediate.
Okay.
Almost immediately, I knew I had to get off of the reef and up to the hut. And the reason for that was if I did not survive past my husband getting back to the hut, who was incidentally shelling and collecting on another reef, not too far, but far enough that he could not have heard me had I yelled for help. Mm-hmm. So I knew if I didn't leave a message for him telling him exactly what had happened, he would not have any idea should I not survive. And he needed to know.
Yeah. And so, you wrote down what species? I
did. I wrote down specifically. In fact, I put the one that had stung me, I did not let go because you've stung me and now you're going home. So I put him into a collecting vial and into my collecting bag. Of course, of not being in water, he didn't survive, but I do still have him. He is on exhibit in our Death by Natural Causes exhibit here at the museum.
The actual shell.
The actual shell.
I asked you that off camera before we started. I said, did you keep the assailant with you? And you did. She's kept it. And you can see it here at Death by Natural Causes. It's incredible. So you said when you passed out shortly after you got to the hut, which, by the way, in that kind of situation, you said you used all the antihistamines you had available. You used papaya leaves. Basically, and you mentioned the mosquitoes, which could have contained malaria and all sorts of things. But
absolutely,
let's fight one fire at a time here.
One fire at a time.
So you lay down. You did the best you could. I think when your doctor said, "Well, you did just what you had available," and that probably guaranteed save your life. The antihistamines probably kept your throat from closing.
It kept my lungs from closing down.
Right.
It made that continue to work. And the papaya, I don't know whether it actually did any good. There's no definite proof that it does. But beforehand, I had researched, what do I do if I'm stung by this? What do I do if I'm bit by this snake? What do I do if we run into this kind of shark? What is the best thing to do? And we did run into a lot of sharks.
Yeah.
And that was really cool, except at night, which is not a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
No.
You know, one of the scary things also to this, because I think a lot of people listening would just assume, what's the thing you fear most about the ocean or about the beach? I guarantee you 99.9% of people would say sharks.
Oh.
I don't want to get bit by a shark. So it's extra terrifying to know, if you have an aversion to the beach, this podcast ain't going to help you at all. That if you're looking for the sharks to eat you, the snails can end your life. Probably, I bet you snails, poisonous snails, mollusks, probably kill more people. I need to verify this before I just put it out there. But I would wager that mollusks, deadly poisonous snails, and little sea creatures like that vastly outnumber the number of shark deaths. Shark deaths per year is like 10. Johnny Hemberger, your mental curator here, chiming in with an editorial note. I did look it up, and mollusks, like the cone snail, that barbed Tina, count for about 200,000 deaths annually, but not exactly from the venom, which can obviously be very deadly to a person, but more so for the diseases that they carry. That was interesting. All right, let's carry on.
There are octopus who are also mollusks, that such as the blue ring octopus. And we know that there are several species. I think there are 4 main species. Most of those can be found primarily around Australia. So if you're at the Houston beach or a Texas beach, you don't have to worry about being stung by a blue ring octopus or by a deadly conus. We don't have those in the Gulf except way out in the Gulf in deep water. They don't ever get up to the beach. So you don't have to worry about getting in shallow water with mollusks in any way in our area. The blue rings can kill you within a couple of minutes if you don't get to medical help immediately.
Gotcha.
And it does happen in Australia because people don't realize they are so tiny, they can crawl inside an empty shell. And it has happened where people have picked up a shell, put it in their pocket, and then gone on down the beach and end up getting stung and not realizing what had happened and collapse on the beach. If help gets to them in time, they've made it.
Yeah.
If not, people die.
Yeah. Especially if you don't know, let's say you're walking on the beach alone. You can't, if I was walking with you, I say, I don't feel right. And
yeah, something's wrong.
If
What's
you're by
going
yourself
on?
and
Yeah.
let's say you could go off to the porta potty and just not come out. A very undignified way to find you, but that's certainly
absolutely true. You know, I think the thing you asked, what is your most fearful thing in the ocean? I would have to say box jellyfish, because they are the most deadly of all creatures in the ocean. And I can say that very easily.
Aren't they small?
They can get, the body will be small, but they have long trailing tentacles, 5, 6, 8 feet long, that if all one has to do is the tiniest touch on you and you've been intubated, and if you are lucky enough to have someone with you immediately who knows what to do, you will survive.
Is there truth to urinating on it?
No.
Not in that situation.
No, don't mean a thing. Don't worry about that. If
I know
it
what
happens,
to do. Hold still.
take some vinegar in your car. If you go to any beach that has jellyfish where your children or you might be stung by a jellyfish, the best thing to do is vinegar. Keep some in your car or in a little jar. Pour it on there. It's going to sting, but it'll stop that burning.
Are there box jellies around Galveston?
There are
Texas
reports of a small species that may have been, but there's no authentication yet.
Okay.
Most of those occur around Australia.
Okay.
And I don't know why Australia seems to attract so many deadly snakes
Australia.
and spiders. And
they're at the bottom of the world, so all the deadly stuff just kind of sinks down to where...
I don't know, but
I'm just kidding.
You be careful when you go to Australia. There's lots of beauty, but lots of danger.
Isn't that true? We're in an exhibit that exemplifies that. Lots of beauty and lots of danger. Usually, a lot of times in nature, when something is beautiful, that's usually their natural way of saying back off. I mean, it helps with mating and reproduction, everything like that. But to us who know better, color in nature is very often the case, an indicator of stay away. I am poisonous.
Right.
Don't touch me. Don't eat me.
Such as poison dart frogs, brightly colored. Stay away. Don't eat me. A lot of mollusks have that same type of correlation with their body colors.
So what is, other than drowning, I would imagine that drowning, when somebody goes to the Galveston or Surfside or anywhere, Freeport, anywhere on the Texas coast, as with any body of water, probably the number one danger is drowning.
Yes.
But as far as animals, let's just say Galveston, what would be the most deadly animal in the waters in Galveston? Sorry, Galveston Tourism Board.
Actually, you're pretty safe in Galveston. There is very little in Galveston waters that would be deadly. You do run a risk of a possible shark bite, but that happens, once a year, maybe?
Maybe that.
And probably not by a large enough shark that could kill you. Probably just a really painful and possibly disfiguring bite. I mean, you never know. But be careful of where you are. And as you said, drowning is probably the biggest fear that you should have in that whole Texas coast. If they're saying that there are undercurrents or there are strong currents, don't get in the water. I don't care how bad you want to go surfing. Don't do it. It's not worth it. I know people who have drowned and been pulled underwater by those same currents. So please don't let that happen to you.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're in pretty good shape around here.
Good. We talked to, I don't know, did you talk to Meg-tooth diver JT, John Taylor, that was here recently?
Yes, yes.
I mean, he's got tails. Unfortunately, the number one, killer of shark teeth divers is drowning, is their air tanks running out. You want to find that last tooth. Oh, just one more tooth. I want to find one more tooth. And your regulator's screaming at you. We don't have enough oxygen left or whatever it's called. Drowning is a thing. And one of his his buddies fairly recently got dragged out by suspected rip current. You can't, and he can't swim against it.
You can't see them. You can't see them.
No.
No.
Yeah, we felt it. I think most people who have been to the beach have felt rip current. That it is one of the most terrifying feelings.
Even the slightest amount of that is terrifying. I have tried to swim against a strong current, was not a rip tide, and even at that, I could not keep up.
Right.
So it's not something to play with at all.
Listen to your gut.
Be smart.
For sure, and obey the signs. I want to go back to the beach real quick.
Okay.
Back to the hut. You said you woke up about 3 days later. Y'all are good. Y'all can walk through. It's okay. You're good. Yeah. I might leave that in. I don't know.
It's good.
Anyways, back to the hut. You said you woke up after 3 days. Did your husband find you within that 3 days? Did you wake up to your husband or?
Oh, yeah. He was sitting at the little table watching because he said, you've been moving around and talking a little bit.
Oh.
And he said, that's good because I knew you were still breathing enough you could talk.
Right.
So, yeah, I woke up and sat on the side of the bed and laid immediately back down as I was dizzy. Still hanging on, but.
Did it feel like, I've only had this type of surgery once where I needed to be put under. My lung collapsed when I was 17. Spontaneous pneumothorax, I don't recommend it.
Oh.
But they put me under just for an hour or so to put this it's not a stent, the suction tube, whatever, reinflate my lung.
Sure.
But they knocked me out, obviously. I don't think they would do that anymore. I had it happen a little bit more recently when I was 25, a little leak, and they said there'd be outpatient now, depending on the trauma. If you just walked in, we probably would have just done a little incision and sent you home the same day with a little baggie or something like that. Not to be so gross. But I remember going under when they anesthetized me, did the anesthesia. I remember passing out vaguely. And I remember just like physical, like I remember pressure. It's just very vague. But that feeling, what I wanted to get to, that disorientation of coming out of anesthesia. Like in my case, I was on a gurney going through the halls. Where I didn't know if I had been out for an hour or a year.
That's right. You have no idea.
Is that how you felt coming out off of that?
Exactly. I didn't know whether it'd been a couple of hours or overnight. And when Frank said, well, it's been almost 3 days since you walked in here and wrote me the note, because I did put the time on it.
Was it just him?
It was just him. There was one other couple on the same island with us. They were actually in a hut down at the far end of that island, which was about a 2-mile walk. So we didn't see each other every day.
Right.
But he did have some problems with a little panic here and there. But basically, he knew we had done everything that I knew to do. And as long as I was still breathing, he didn't get a lot of sleep. But
no. And something I think we need to remember here, and I grew up before cell phones also, before cell phones were prolific. I didn't get my first I say cell phone, not a smartphone, cell phone. In like 2001, it was a Nokia 3310. But anyways, when you were bit, I'm not, phones existed, but not in the hut. There was no phone in the hut.
There was no electricity. There was no electricity. There were no, we were about 15 miles off the coast of Guadalcanal, which is the largest island in the Solomon Islands. And a lot of you may have heard of Guadalcanal. It was a large base during World War II. A lot of serious death occurred there.
Yeah.
The only way to get to the island was by boat, and the only way to get off onto Guadalcanal again was by boat. And then you had to radio there for a plane to come and pick you up. And I say a plane, one propeller, and the airstrip was grass, and we went right over the end of the island and came back and landed. In fact, I think we clipped a couple of palm trees landing.
Yeah, it was probably...
So, no, there were no phones. There was no electricity. There was no help.
Right.
There was no help.
It's probably like a Cessna Caravan or a Cessna 172 or something.
Yeah, I don't
so
even know.
what did you, I don't know if you already mentioned it, but what year was this?
You really want to know? It was
I do.
1972.
Good.
1972. The Solomon Islands were still property of the British government, and they were given their freedom. And so instead of being known as a British Solomon Island protectorate, they were now the Solomon Islands, which is really cool for them.
Yeah.
Just really wonderful. But back then, there was very little transportation. There were no phones. There was no cell phone existed. That was way before those.
Mhm.
So radio was the only way.
Yeah. Just
And we did not have a radio to keep in touch with somebody on our little island.
So when you go to this island in 1972 and the little plane lands on the grass strip and you knock a few bananas off the tree on your way in, did the pilot say, "Good luck"?
Actually,
Bye-bye.
I don't even remember talking to him because a lot of natives had seen the plane, and usually that meant either supplies coming in or visitors. And so they really loved meeting Americans because the Americans had helped them so much during the war.
Right.
So they had heard that there were Americans coming in that were going to be staying on this certain island. Let me tell you the name of the island. It's really cool.
Yes, please.
The name of the island was Tavani Pupu.
Tavani Puku.
Tavani Pupu, which actually
Puku.
means pool of clear, dark water.
That's pretty.
Because the island itself was like the top of a mountain, it dropped straight down. There was very little beach area. It dropped straight down. So you could get in the water and dive to 100 feet just going straight down. It was awesome. Beautiful. Absolutely exquisite.
That's one of the most disconcerting feelings also when you walk out onto into the waves and then just drops out.
That drops out.
So in Galveston, when it drops out, it's dropping out a couple feet. There's just a current that's kind of scooping out a sandbar a little bit.
Yeah,
but this island, Pupu Island, you could just drop straight off into a trench.
Straight
Not
down.
even a trench, just the bottom of the ocean floor.
That's right.
Because that's what a lot of islands are they're just mountains with their peaks out of the water.
That's what a lot of these islands are.
Right.
And the reason that it was used so much during World War II is where the islands drop off, it is such deep water that ships can go in between islands that are pretty close together because the water is deep enough in these channels. So they could go in between and hide behind an island and not be seen by
radar. So I should say sonar, technically.
Yeah, even visual. I mean,
visually, you could be 200 feet down. You can't see. That's the thing. When you go down in the ocean, it gets dark pretty quick.
Dark very
I can't free dive that deep, but people can, and it gets dark.
Yes, it does.
Are there any? Maybe we don't have to use this, but it's just a question that just popped in my mind. Are there any bioluminescent mollusks?
Oh, yes. Some species of cypria or cowries can be at certain times of the year, depending on what they've been feeding on and the water temperatures. They can be a little bioluminescent. There are a lot of other organisms living in the sea. Some are living organisms and some are plant that can also bioluminesce.
So that was a great answer to that question. It was one of those things that popped into my brain of, I know this is kind of off topic, but I want to know it, and I have the expert here. Let me ask.
Take a black light and look at shells and see some of the shells will show up in different colors under black light.
You can bring your black light here.
You could.
Here in the Hall of Malacology.
It's kind of light, so you might not be able to see it very well. And we don't encourage that because we really don't need any extra light. These shells are light sensitive. So the reason we have developed this lighting, and I got to say, I'm going to brag on our exhibits people here.
Yes.
They spent months researching what kind of lights to use when we redid this hall. It is absolutely spectacular. It's state of the art and can be equaled by no other museum in the world. Other museums are coming to us to ask, how did you do this? What are you using? What was used? How do you install it? Because the care that has gone into the preservation and health of these specimens is incredible.
Are these kind of hermetically sealed, a little bit isolated from the
They
general
are,
air?
except that occasionally, because nothing, even in plastic bags, is perfectly well sealed.
Right.
Occasionally, we do get a little dust inside. So
Right.
once a year or so, most of them are open, not all, but most of them are opened briefly to dust out to make sure that otherwise they are very well protected.
Yes, and
Very well protected.
they are presented, in my opinion, like world-class jewels.
They
Like
are.
the way that you have them presented here. Obviously, like you mentioned, other museums and institutions coming here to ask you, how did you do this? How did you mount this? How did you display? What are the
They
techniques
are.
you use? Because I promise you, you haven't seen shells, mollusks, ocean biology on display like you see here. And some of these, I'm looking across through the light. And I've been here many times. I mean, I work here, so I've been here thousands of times, even through my life. Lived in Houston 40 years. This exhibit isn't that old, but I've been here a lot, and you see, like, there's the cases that you have all the rainbow. It looks artificial, but it's not. Those are the colors of nature, and the way you have them displayed in such a beautiful cornucopia of colors and accents it's breathtaking. I don't
They
think you have
really
to.
are so special.
Right.
They're so special. People go to our beach, and we have in Texas, we have what we call mostly LBJs, little brown jobbies.
Okay.
Okay, LBJs.
Yes.
So they are not real colorful. The closer you get to coral reefs, you will find animals that have more color. They take on what's available in the water for them.
Right.
They take on the calcium, not only through the water that they're breathing in and out, but also through the food that they're eating. So a lot of color comes from other places around the world. Go to Florida, you'll find things that are much more colorful. Go to the Caribbean, you will find the same thing. We don't have quite that same water depth and temperatures here. We do have coral reefs off of the Texas coast, which were incidentally found originally by the once president of this museum.
Wow.
And the man who began our Malacology program, Dr. Tom Pulley.
Wow.
And he is the one who contacted the government to tell them, there are coral reefs out here that need to be protected. They were being used by fishermen who would anchor because fish would gather there. There was food for the fish to eat. So they were anchoring on these coral reefs, but the anchors were doing irreparable damage.
Yeah.
So now you can't go fish there.
Right.
The flower gardens, Stetson Bank, there's like 11 islands or islands of coral now that are in a NOAA protected site.
That's wonderful.
Which makes me very happy.
Yes. My mind goes to just being inquisitive. Well, what is it about the Gulf? Is it all Gulfs that you maybe not have prolific corals, or am I just, they're everywhere, you just have to know where to find them?
Actually, corals are very tropical oriented. Basically, in most areas around the world, coral reefs are much more prevalent around that center band of the earth itself. The temperate zone, okay?
Right.
You think about the temperate zone, that's where most of the areas that have large collections of coral and much more pretty, branching and beautiful corals. Most of our corals off of Texas are important, but they're what we call covering corals. They kind of ooze over rocks and things and make a beautiful covering, but they're not the long spiky things. The pretty, we do have a lot of really beautiful soft corals. Did you know corals could be soft?
I didn't even think of it.
They're wonderful. If you've ever seen a sea fan in a picture underwater, that thing that does this, that beautiful, that is a coral. Wow. Is a type of coral.
Because coral is a colony of organisms.
Corals are colonies. It's not one animal. And they are animals, not plants.
Are there any corals that, besides lacerating yourself horribly, are there any poisonous corals?
Yes, there are. There's one especially called fire coral, and it's exactly what it says, fire coral. The tiniest touch, and you're on fire, and it could last for days.
And I imagine that could be deadly to someone who's immunocompromised or something like that. But it might make you wish you were. If I was a surfer and I just got my whole leg.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you would. People have lost limbs because of contact. Yeah.
I turn razor razor coral. I've heard surfers kind of
Oh,
refer to razor.
razor coral is beautiful. It's absolutely
Yeah.
exquisite, but it is just that, razor sharp.
Mhm.
It's little blades that come out from a center, and these little blades make like a blossom. And they're beautiful, but they are extremely hazardous. Let's
Yeah.
put it that way. I won't say dangerous to your health. They're very hazardous.
They're
They're not something you want to pick up.
no, you
In
don't.
fact, don't pick up corals.
No, and it's not something you want to be rolling on if you get tossed by a wave or something.
No,
No,
no.
absolutely not.
That would not be a fun day.
No. So let's start wrapping up here. You made it back to the United States, and you touched on some side effects that you're still dealing with today.
Yeah.
How long would you say from point of getting stung 3 times to a relatively normal life? How long do you think that amount of recovery took to where you weren't completely just sidelined by your injuries?
I wasn't sidelined. Once we got back to the United States, I still had headaches off and on that did affect my work because I was a teacher at the time.
Mm.
And when we went back to school, started up again in the fall, I did have headaches a little more often. But as the years progressed, the headaches lessened, and I still get one now and then. A little bit of problem with some vision in one eye that comes and goes. But it did take me several years to be able to use that finger again adequately, as I dropped a lot of dishes.
Yeah.
Ask my kids.
Uh-huh.
I dropped a lot of dishes those first 2 or 3 years.
Just from weakness.
Just
kinda
because
from
you can't tell. I mean, there was almost no feeling
Oh, yeah.
for a long
Okay.
time. And then you couple that with the fact that it's very stiff and doesn't bend all the way. You forget that.
Mhm.
You're washing dishes, you go to put that up to hand it to somebody to dry, and bam, there goes I
Well,
lost a lot of dishes.
I wonder if the title of this podcast should be "What Doesn't Kill You Makes You a Stronger Malacologist."
That could be a very truthful saying, because a lot of malacologists have had sort of similar occurrences. There have not been that many that were actually envenomated by a cone snail, but experiences speaking with others who have been envenomated by cone snails has improved. There are people doing research into those venoms now, and one of the greatest of those is in Salt Lake City, Dr. Toto Oliveira, and he's my hero. These venoms can be turned into pain relievers that are not toxic. They are not they won't make you addicted in
Right.
any way, shape, or form. They also can be specifically tuned to a certain area.
Wow.
Say you've broken your leg. Well, if you can afford
Yeah.
the pain. The problem with them is this cocktail of venoms is so exquisitely, unbelievably complicated, it cannot be replicated by humans yet.
Right.
There are Dr. Toto Oliveira and some of his students are working on more. They've had 4 that have been approved by the Drug Administration for use, but they have to be produced from live venom.
Right.
They are not reproduced
Not
as we
synthetic.
would go to a lab and be able to make those elements of that particular pain medication.
Mhm.
But they are incredibly important to the future of mankind. There are also some doing research into cures for cancer and other things that have to do with mollusks and other things that live in the oceans, especially the deep oceans. So it's an area, if you're a student looking for something important to do to dedicate your life to, I suggest you go into marine biology and start studying some of these rare things that we know someday will help provide relief for the human
Absolutely.
as well as animals.
All life starts in the ocean.
It does. Well, and our life depends on the oceans.
Right.
If we destroy all of the mollusks, we also destroy all the fish.
Mm-hmm.
And we destroy all the fish, what is most of the rest of the world going to eat? Because 60% of the rest of the world gets their primary source of protein from the ocean in some manner.
Absolutely.
So
And it's
we've
one
got
of
to
those,
protect it.
yes, and it's on that note, one of those, I think there's a disconnect. Sometimes it's hard to wrap our minds around when a scientist says, hey, even 1/10 of a degree of difference in this tropical region can throw off the entire food chain, can have disastrous ramifications even for human beings, let alone just marine life. And it's hard to think. It's hard to think. How does a 1/10 of a degree, how can it throw off the entire food chain and harm our existence? But then you think of the way I can best equate it in my mind is a giant house of cards, a skyscraper of cards. And you just if you take one away,
You don't even have to take it away. Move it.
Just move it, and the
Just
whole
move it,
thing
and the whole thing is
can
going to collapse.
That's
Absolutely.
how fragile it is. And that's one of my favorite parts about this exhibit is that there's a whole case over there how mankind is, the fishing line going through the mollusk shells, and how it's not just pollution. It's like
how
I said,
man
that
affects our ocean.
right. That and why it's important. If you're sitting by yourself in Iowa, as far away from ocean as you could possibly get on this continent, you're like, well, how does a fish dying in the Caribbean, or how does the dragonfish overtaking in certain regions, how does that affect me? Well, you go to your grocery store and now your mackerel is 100 times more expensive. Like, it has these ripple effects that go out that do affect your bottom line and your health, even sitting there in Iowa.
That's right.
Tina.
Everything is affected.
Yeah, it's all connected. Circle of life.
Yeah. Very true.
Tina, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond Bones podcast.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
If you'd like to learn more about the cone snail that almost killed Tina, come visit our Death by Natural Causes exhibit at the Houston Museum of Natural Science. And when you're done there, you can go downstairs and take a leisurely stroll through our George W. Strake Hall of Malacology to learn more about marine life, mollusks, and how important our ocean is to our planet. I've been your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, and as always, thanks for listening and stay curious. Huge shout out to my 3-month-old for being quiet long enough to let me record this outro.